Okay, next up is going to be Age of Ancients, a game lit Liberty series, Shattered Kingdom Book Number 1, written by Aaron Oster. It is 334 pages, $3.99. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. Dabu's life has been far from easy. Born with a crippling lung illness, he has never been as strong as his father or brother, both of whom have disappeared after attempting the challenge of the trials of the ancients. In the wake of the Tyrant King's war, his village has come under the control of the Purus, a vicious gang of magically enhanced cutthroats and murderers. The trials offer the promised power to any who can clear them, but Dabu has been forbidden from entering. After a violent encounter leaves his family in danger, Dabu faces a difficult decision. Either leave the village to challenge the trials or stay and risk starvation. The trials are monstrously difficult, filled with dangerous beasts, deadly obstacles, and tribes of challengers who control the areas within. But if he can make it out alive, Dabu will gain the power he needs to finally drive the Purus from his home. So there you go. Okay, I think this had like a really nice opening for the Liberty series. It follows a familiar pattern of a loose routine who gets a little luck rather, but through much sacrifice and motivation goes on a kind of dungeon crawl to become powerful enough to go up against his tormentors and troublemakers. So that premise is familiar, but I thought it was really nice and that the author establishes a really good reason for the main character to take the risk of jumping in this dungeon, and a good power progression of him growing with enough challenges to make it feel like he worked for it. So good stuff there. On the RPG side of stuff, there is consistency here with a decent mix of interesting powers. The RPG mechanics are a little bit looser, just to make the power progression feel valid. There are definitely time jumps in the story that were annoying for me personally because they push the main character to new power levels without me actually seeing him do it. It's like, oh, and a week later of training, I'm this powerful. And I'm like, okay, I guess. So on that side of things, like I was a little disappointed, but overall the power structure and the powers he has and uses are done intelligently. So that's still a plot on the overall. Very pleased with that. I like that there's a mix of magic and chi. So I also like that the eventual progression of that system. Well, I'm trying to spoil things. There's good crunch here, lots of notifications, lots of power descriptions, lots of that kind of stuff without being too much to bog down in the story. So it's a really good balance there. The things I didn't care for that kind of drew down my enjoyment. There is a villain set up in the beginning of the story, which I just talked about in the novel description. And that enemy, that conflict is not resolved by the main character. So I was like, there's a setup for the main character here. And then by the end of the story, I'm like, it's resolved, but it's not by the main character. So all that tension that was built up at the beginning felt flat to me. I didn't ultimately mind how it was resolved. I was on a storytelling, like, disappointed, that it wasn't the main character that made that progression, because it's made such a big deal about him. This is literally the reason he's going into the dungeon. This is literally the reason he's going through all this oppression and power and struggle. And in the end, when he comes out, that doesn't exist anymore. Like there's a different antagonist that is presented to the main character that he eventually resolves things with. Well, again, I'm trying to spoil things. But it wasn't that original one that's talked about in the novel description. So I was like, that's a letdown for me. Also, the end was entirely predictable. But overall, the story had a good action still. It had good world building and again, a nice setup for future storylines. So all in all, entertaining. Gets a score of 7.4 to 10. Age of the Ancients, a game lit Liberty series, Shattered Kingdoms, book number 1, with a score 7.4 out of 10.